This is a compilation of all of the personal training concepts that I think are most essential to know. If you're trying to make gains, whether that be muscle mass, strength, or endurance, we're going to break down how to approach your exercise in 3 different categories: the principles, programs, and philosophies of lifting. And let it be known that I think none of this overrides any of the other material in my program of saying we need to focus on our attuned state, on how our body feels. We need to have body awareness, have mind muscle connection, and understanding that these concepts are optimizations. They are a schematic way of looking at things so that you can drive results. If you feel like you're already able to pay attention to your body and you can live in this sort of attuned state, then these are the things that will help you get closer to your results faster. But without that foundation of attuned awareness, of body awareness, I think this guide is only helpful with the context of what we've already built. So that being said, let's just jump right in because I have gotten a lot of questions on some of these fitness concepts. There are obviously a lot of different topics in here, so I'm just going to go through them. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a DM or add a comment or write me in whatever form you prefer, and I will make an addendum that has like an FAQ. So I've talked about building exercise identity quite a bit in that we need to primarily form our mind so that we are not shying away from exercise. We need to say, I am the type of person who likes exercise. I like picking up physical activities, making these statements so that you can then cast little votes, which build alignment with that identity is really helpful. It's a little bit of a flywheel. The more that you do it, the more that you're likely to associate with that identity, which will then make you more likely to continue to cast votes. And we can build exercise identity in a couple different ways. You can say, I'm the type of person who likes running, I like weightlifting. I think it's essential to pick up some element of your identity that associates with weight training. Just because I personally believe that it is the best bang for your buck for getting in good shape, for having the physique that you crave. You need to increase your bone density. You need to increase muscle mass so that you can burn more calories at rest, so that you can have this sort of sponge to act for greater immune function and so on. So the main fitness principle that everybody should understand is the SAID principle, which is specific adaptation to imposed demands. And what this really means is that whatever demand you impose on your body, you're going to get better at that, at handling that. So you can use this to increase your cardiovascular function. You can increase your flexibility or mobility. You can increase your adaptations with more muscle. And it depends on the demands that you're placing, and it depends that you are progressively overloading those demands. So for like cardio or running, you would say, I'm going to run a mile and then I'm going to run a 1/10 of a mile more. And you're going to continue to add this sort of safe 10% each time that you can, that you're capable. And it depends on what you're going for. If you're trying to train for distance, you should absolutely progressively overload your distance. If you're trying to get faster, you should try to run that mile in a shorter amount of time every time that you run. If you're trying to increase your muscle mass and lose fat, then I think weight training is absolutely the thing that you should focus on for progressive overload. So to do so with weightlifting, we have a couple factors that we can increase our demands. So you might want increased muscular endurance. You might want increased muscle mass, also known as hypertrophy, or you might want just greater strength and to be able to lift more. So to do so, we're going to pull a couple different levers here. We have sets, reps, volume, frequency, intensity, and rest. So a lot of times when you find a program online or you are learning about weightlifting, you're going to start out with 3 sets of 10. And I generally advise that people start this way as well. We'll talk about that in the program. But I think that you should understand why we're doing it that way. Recognize that these numbers of 3 by 10 are guidelines. If you're not imposing sufficient demands with progressive overload or in understanding the SAID principle, and you do 10 reps, but that's not actually hitting any type of limit for you, then you should absolutely increase the number of reps. Or if your program says 3 by 8 or 3 by 10 and you're only able to get a few based on the weight that you're using, I actually would recommend that you do that because that is sufficient demand. It's easy to understand for these factors, a rule of thumb to get the desired results that you want. So with muscle building being on this spectrum of saying you're either going to get endurance gains, you're going to get muscle mass gains, or you're going to get strength gains, the lower the weight and the higher the repetitions that you do, you'll get more endurance and stability. And on the other side of the coin, the lower number of reps, but the higher weight that you are overloading will get you more strength gains. And there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. People commonly use 8 to 12 reps as that sweet spot for building muscle mass. I also think it's really essential that you understand the level of rest that you're approaching for your weightlifting. A lot of people, one of the most common program changes that I make is that they are resting for only 30 seconds between each set. It is more effective, it is almost always more effective to rest for 1.5 to 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes between each set, because you want to make sure that your previous set is not overly impacting your level of fatigue so that you can perform your next set effectively. There definitely are more levers that you can pull. I think these are the main ones, but understanding your overall volume, so how many total sets and reps are you doing, has gains, and it's kind of a diminishing returns game. So you can keep cranking out volume, you can do more and more. You can do 3 sets of 10 for bench press for your chest, and then you can do 3 sets of 10 for your pec deck, and then you can do 3 sets of 10 of dips, all to target your chest. But as you continue to add more volume for a specific muscle, there are diminished returns. So I actually often recommend that you hit that number of trying to do 3 by 10 for a specific muscle, getting that stimulus, making sure that it is demanding, sufficiently demanding, and then moving on to a new muscle. Frequency refers to how often you're exercising. So it's easier to get more volume and more frequency as like a easy way to just get more gains. But again, you have to rest and you have to ensure that you're not overloading your frequency excessively. I think that overloading by frequency and by overall volume are not the best way forward. So you need to make sure that when you do have adequate stimulus for your muscles, you went and you did your workout where you got 6 total sets for your chest or for your triceps or whatever. Take a break, give yourself some time to adequately fuel your body with rest, with sleep, with nutrition, and then hit that muscle group again later. My rule of thumb is that the more volume that you have, generally you need more time to recover. So in doing something like I did 3 by 10 of triceps today, I might be able to go and do 3 by 10 of triceps tomorrow, but I like to kind of spread it out and say I'm going to give myself a day of rest between each time that I've sufficiently stimulated my muscles. Intensity kind of refers to how hard you're working during a workout. So I think that the higher intensity but the lower frequency and the lower volume are generally better. This is kind of a debated topic. I always think it is better to have higher intensity to a point where you're not putting excessive load and strain on your body. You definitely should start out, in my opinion, on the endurance side of the spectrum, building out good coordination, good endurance that will enable you to have a response when you do start doing more hypertrophy or more strength gains. But as we go on, we do generally want to increase our intensity. And that's not to say that any of these are all or nothing. I really do encourage you, if you find that one day you're feeling like you can do 3 by 8, go for it. If you're finding that you can do way more than that, roll with those punches. If you find that you are in a really low energy day and your intensity just might not be there because you've had a hard day, it's better to get a little bit rather than just saying I'm not going to do it at all. In terms of diet and nutrition and rest, these are prerequisites for growth. So when you're stimulating your muscle with these levers above, that's not actually building muscle, it's tearing your muscle down so that we can build muscle up for next time. So you're not going to get any stronger, you're not going to build muscle if you're not satisfying these requirements. Generally, you need to consume adequate protein and calories so that you can fuel your workout and fuel your muscle protein synthesis, your recovery for your muscles. An easy rule of thumb for that is that you try to get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. So for someone like me, I weigh about 150 pounds, so I try to get 150 grams of protein per day. Again, maybe easier said than done. Some days I might overshoot this, some days I might undershoot this. I try to stay around this number, but I think like anything else, it can be somewhat variable for the health and longevity of kind of this whole system. Again, calories are extremely important, so you need to actually be able to fuel your workout. I generally don't recommend that you tweak your caloric intake excessively when you're first starting out. I think that if you have a specific goal in mind, absolutely get there, but this is a lever that, in my opinion, you should start to manipulate further down the line rather than thinking about it, unless you're chronically underfueled or you're like way out of control and you have way too many calories in your system. But I think that as you build muscle, you will begin to understand your basal metabolic rate a little bit better, and you can kind of watch this over time. And fundamentally, I just don't like messing with too many levers all at the same time. So try to pick one and tweak that as you can. This is kind of like an optimization that I think you can make later in the game. Generally, I don't worry about my macros, but some people have a lot of success by really portioning out their level of carbohydrates, fats, and protein as an overall percentage of their diet. And there are rules of thumb for these, but I personally don't really pay that much attention to them, so I don't find that I'm super qualified to speak on this topic. If you do have questions about it, I'm absolutely happy to point you towards the science and the literature that says what your ratios should be. I try to just look at my overall protein and my overall calories. Rest and sleep are also equally important. I think rest can mean two things. It can mean how much time you're waiting between each set and understanding your total volume. It's also important to have rest in the context of sleep and enabling that you are enabling yourself to get these building blocks where they need to go, which is kind of the purpose of sleep. So maintaining an effective bedtime routine, sleep hygiene is really important so that you are getting really good sleep. Otherwise, your muscle building will suffer. Real quick, I think it's worth talking about creatine as well. Creatine is a supplement that is really heavily researched. It's one of the most common fitness supplements. It's good for your brain, it's good for your body. I recommend taking it, but I don't want to necessarily say that you have to begin supplementation. So do your own research on it. I like it. I try to take about 5 grams a day, maybe even 10 grams. Next, we should talk about how you actually target your muscles so that they do grow. If you understand how to tweak the levers above, great. Let's apply that in a way that gives you a balanced physique and a physique that feels healthy. First and foremost, let's understand the two different types of exercises. There are many categorizations of exercises, but I like to think of isolated and compound exercises. There are also closed and open chain exercises, but I'm not going to talk about those here. Generally, isolated exercises are movements that hit one specific muscle. You're always going to have some amount of a synergist effect of, like, if I'm doing a bicep curl, I am generally hitting my bicep, but I might also be hitting my brachioradialis. I might also be hitting some amount of my deltoid in the sense that I have to keep my arm static. But that's generally an isolated exercise in that I'm not executing the lift with a compound of multiple muscles, where something like a bench press hits your chest at the same time that it hits your triceps, kind of dependent on where you are in the movement, but overall it's a compound lift. There's also the distinction of a unilateral exercise versus a bilateral exercise. So something like a split squat versus a full body squat, where you're hitting one leg at a time or one arm at a time. I think it's really helpful to add in unilateral exercises because it enables you to activate as a synergist some amount of your core, or these kind of anti-rotational movements and muscles that we have in our body. Generally good for your back and good for your core. So don't skip out on your unilateral exercises. Trust me, you will feel a lot better when you do. Rather than a two-handed curl all the time, switch to just a one arm once in a while. And I say this because doing unilateral exercises helps us identify where we have gaps and where you might have some dominance that you weren't even aware of. If you are squatting all the time and you never go and do a single leg movement, you might realize that your right leg is actually the thing that's driving the majority of the weight, even if you don't really see it or you're not aware that that's the case. And I recommend that you understand some amount of muscle imbalances, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you need to provide comprehensive stimulus to all of the muscles in your body. And this is because not only will you develop a muscle imbalance if you only ever are performing something like a bench press and never hitting your back with like rows, but it really helps to get a full body coverage because it stimulates your body to grow and it gives you these benefits of endorphins flowing through your body. If you never hit your legs and you only ever do upper body, you're missing out on just all of this mass, all of this volume that you could otherwise have had as flooding your body with endorphins by hitting your legs or by hitting your core. So a lot of people do think, oh, I'm just only ever going to train my legs if I want to get big glutes, or oh, I'm only ever going to train my arms if I want to have big arms. And this is a little bit dangerous because if you do develop a muscle imbalance, then you're going to have one side of your body that is overactive and one that is underactive, and that might lead to a postural distortion. And what that might mean is that you will get pain in a certain area. So I like to think of your body as like a series of cables pulling on like a mast. So if I have a mast here and I pull excessively and I tighten and tighten and tighten in my bicep where I never hit my tricep, eventually the hinges are going to take some amount of strain, and what that would manifest is something like tennis elbow or like your shoulder impingement or something where you've chronically made active one muscle without the appropriate response in the other muscle. So I encourage you to try to break out of your comfort zone and make a balanced routine for yourself so that you can articulate all of your muscles and have good mobility. It's worth noting that everything that you do reinforces your muscle activity. So if you are seated all the time or if you're using your phone a lot, that's chronically going to make you adopt a certain posture. So we can actually kind of use the gym to sort of offset this as we build strength across both sides of our kinetic chains. So I think if you are going to design your own program, definitely start small and just try to get a good coverage of everything. And we can talk about that at length. If you have any questions for me and you want to make sure that your routine is comprehensive, let me know. It's also worthwhile to note the range of motion of each of your exercises, and this develops some finesse and nuanced understanding. As you begin in the gym, you probably won't differentiate between doing a curl at like half range of motion and then getting full range of motion. That takes time. I encourage you to just pay attention with mind muscle connection to understand the nuances of a curl, because getting all the way into a stretch state and getting all the way into a contracted state are really important. Try your hardest to get good range of motion. If you're only ever benching in like a 3-inch window, then your muscles will not adapt to understanding what is it like when I bottom out? What is it like when I completely constrict my chest and get all the way into a full push? And again, on mind muscle connection, it is a thing, it is a skill that takes time to develop. I think it's absolutely worth developing because it shows you if you're going to get good range of motion. It shows you where you might be using a synergist more than you're using the main mover of that muscle. So work hard in every session to try to build mind muscle connection. It gives those mental benefits, as I've talked about over and over again. Being present and being aware of your body enable you to think in less of a schematic way, where you're not so much thinking about your program with thoughts and words, but you're more being attuned, you're living within your body, which has its own benefit. And tapping into mind muscle connection is great for understanding the euphoria of going to the gym, because as you continue to tear down your muscles, your body will release endorphins. And so if you're not paying attention to your body awareness, you might just miss out on that and it's not going to be as satisfying. So try to build mind muscle connection, use body scanning, use awareness. And again, if you have any questions on how to actually do this, let me know. I'm hoping that you are able to figure out how to do a body scan and then how to translate that into mind muscle connection. It will be uncomfortable, absolutely. Like going to the gym hurts your body. It does hurt your muscles, but your body will have an equal response in the other direction to say, yeah, we are going to feel good. We're going to flood your body with endorphins. So paying attention to this is really important. So I'm hoping at this point you understand these principles. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you have the goal of getting a greater level of endurance, then hopefully now you can say, well, I should probably increase the number of reps. If you are hoping to get stronger, then absolutely try to just keep increasing the level of weight while keeping your reps low and so on. I think it's worthwhile to note that you will meet your goals so long as you tailor the principles towards your goals, but don't over-index on them. What I mean by that is that if you are having a really hard time feeling like you're making progress in the gym because you're really trying to get stronger and you only ever want to lift just like 3 reps or 4 reps to get that strength response, but it just doesn't really feel that good and you aren't liable to stick to it because you actually find that you enjoy doing more endurance-based activities, definitely go there and say, I'm going to just forego some of the strength gains for now and focus mostly on endurance. And if you've been doing endurance and you are like, I really actually would like to get stronger, or if you don't find it enjoyable to do the endurance-based workouts and you'd rather just straight away tap into strength because that feels better, I encourage you to start there. Listen to your body, focus on what feels good, and eventually you can start to make these optimizations over time. It's also worth noting that you probably are going to like some exercises and not like other ones. I really don't like doing back squats. I've found that it's just not that fun for me. I've grinded them out a handful of times and just said this is not that satisfying. Even though I like the idea of being able to back squat a lot, I would rather just do split squats or leg press at this point. So try some different things out because you might find that you hate one, but you actually really do like a different exercise. I think if you're at the very beginning of your program, start small, do a low weight and start to build endurance before you build anything else. But you have to identify your level of fatigue. You probably can go harder than 3x10. If you're starting with a really low weight, you might do 3x20 or 3x15 or whatever it is that feels like you're able to tap into mind muscle connection, tap into failure. I always encourage that rather than just a strict adherence to a specific number. And as you continue to work out, bump the weight up and down, bump the reps up and down to find out where that level of failure and fatigue actually comes from, because that's the thing that is going to drive your stimulus. And then with proper nutrition and rest, that's the thing that will actually drive your gains for next time. And I didn't mention it in here, but definitely get your protein, calories, and rest, and hydration. Hydration is super important. So some of the other philosophies that I like to approach weightlifting with are around motivation and fitness habits and discipline. So let's jump right into those. I think it's absolutely worthwhile to articulate why you're trying to get in shape. And I personally have lifted weights for a variety of reasons. When I first started, I was like, I want to be jacked so that I'm attractive. And then I wanted to keep lifting because I wanted to be impressive. And I wanted to say, yeah, look at me and how much weight I can move. And now I do it because it is good for my mental health. And I have some level of intrinsic motivation to say, I do this because I like to do it and I want to do it. But that's certainly not where I started. So I think it's worthwhile to say, why do I actually want to do this? And pay attention to that. Pay attention to the fact that it might change. And I assure you that if you are doing it for like an external factor, eventually you'll most likely, knock on wood, but I can almost guarantee that you'll figure out how to do it for its own sake. Just starting goes such a long way. Motivation and discipline are kind of weird ones in that I think that they're two opposite levers. Motivation is that kind of feeling where you say, I am motivated to do this. I do want to do this in the first place, so I'm going to do it. And discipline is the other side of the coin where you say, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think it's worthwhile to absolutely lean on motivation. If you are like, I really want to look good for my wedding or something like that, use that and say, yeah, I'm motivated. Right now, I want to do it. That will fall off and you will have to build some level of discipline so that you can say, on the days that I just don't feel like it, I'm still going to do something. And it's worthwhile to note that we are going to have different energy levels every single day. So some days you are going to be at such a low energy state that there's no real reason to like completely force yourself into a workout. And there's a little bit of a nuance there to say, if you're not at the lowest level of energy, but you have just enough, absolutely get in the gym, do just one set and then leave. Maybe you get in the gym, you start doing one set and you say, I'm already here, I'm going to keep going. But I think it's worthwhile to understand when you're lifting because you're motivated and when you're lifting because you're disciplined, identifying which occurs more often, and then figuring out if you're trying to rely on discipline and you're having a hard time with that, then build strategies around discipline itself. I think one of those strategies in particular is adding accountability. So finding a friend to lift weights with or finding someone else who can kind of share in that attempted goal. So celebrate your wins with your local circle or with me or whoever it is that you want to talk about your fitness journey. I think that's really helpful. Consistency is another thing that has become kind of a buzzword in that I think that people want to become consistent on the micro, but they really should be consistent on the macro. I don't think that I am terribly consistent personally. I don't think I'm terribly disciplined either. But if you look at your lifting journey in the long term and you say, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life for a decade, if you miss 3 days, fine. 3 days in the span of like 10 years is barely anything. Don't let it cascade and become, I'm out of the gym for a week, I'm out of the gym for a month, I'm out of the gym for a year, which I think that goes back into understanding your own motivations, why you're doing this, and trying to recognize that it is truly about the long run. Try your hardest to be consistent. I think the easiest way to become consistent is to associate your identity as someone who is consistent and is consistent about the right things, in this case, exercising. But again, there's no sense in beating yourself up over it, because saying I skipped 3 days, it's not going to reset your progress. If you look at it from this really long time horizon, if you take a little detour, sure, you can absolutely get back on the path. And that's what we're trying to do. We're always going to try and say, can I fall off the horse and get back on, rather than just trying to never fall off the horse. There are also other ways to be consistent. So in fitness, you might be consistent if you go for a walk instead of scrolling your phone for an hour. Or if you opted for water over soda with a meal once per week, that's consistency. Maybe you bump that up to never drinking soda. Trying to think of it as this compass that you're aligning yourself over the long horizon towards a goal, where you might start out and go this direction for quite a while, and then you actually need to be a little bit tighter to get closer to your goal. Sure, but it doesn't make any sense to say I'm only ever going to walk exactly along this line. And I think it helps to visualize your trajectory for your fitness. So what is the state that I'm hoping to achieve if I was perfect? If I was 10 years down the line, I had been consistent, I had been hitting the gym, I had been dieting correctly. Can you see that for yourself? And what actions would you need to take to actually do this? So I think it really helps to break these actions down into small steps that you can do today. So if I'm saying I want to be absolutely shredded and have a six pack, I might think to myself, I need to do ab exercises for one. I probably need to do more ab exercises than I'm doing now. But I'm trying to find actions that I today can share with that ideal vision that I've made for myself. So, future Kevin in the ideal world does cable crunches 3 times a week or 5 times a week. I today don't do that, but I can do one cable crunch. I've broken it down and I've said that we share that in common. Ideal future Kevin is doing more of them, sure, but I'm doing the same thing just on a smaller scale. And maybe I found other ways to do this. Maybe I'm doing planks on my lunch break, which might also be what future ideal Kevin is doing. So just thinking to yourself that like doing one push-up isn't necessarily enough to make you Mr. Olympia or to be in the best shape of your life, but it's the only way to start becoming that person, to start getting in shape, is to do just one of those reps. So I always think do the minimum to eventually get to the maximum. Another way to look at consistency is to try to make it as easy on yourself as possible. So working your mind up to saying, I'm going to do a crazy marathon session and I'm going to do the gym 6 days a week or 7 days a week is really hard. So how can you make it easier on yourself? Looking at the immediate is one way to do that and saying, I'm just going to do one rep. Absolutely. It's also really easy to do uncomfortable steps first and isolated. So saying, I am not going to leave a mountain of work for myself. I'm not going to have to wash my gym clothes and then run a program for myself, write it out before I go to the gym. I'm not going to have to find my shoes that are in my closet. I'm not going to have to drive an hour to the gym all at the same time before I even do the work. To do small little steps and to say I am going to write my program before, maybe on my lunch break or right when I get up in the morning. I'm going to identify what it is that I'm going to do in the gym, or I'm going to set my gym shoes when I have just a spare moment between meetings or something like that at the front door. So that way I have just a smaller level of friction before I can even start. I think it's also worthwhile to break down the things that you have found unfamiliar or uncomfortable. So if you don't have any familiarity, if you just hide your shoes in the back of your closet, you're unfamiliar with where those even are. So you have to take that as its own step and say, I've found familiarity with knowing where my supplies are. And I think that this is most commonly in the gym broken down into two things. You have to break down your action unfamiliarity and your location unfamiliarity, which is why I recommend starting at home, doing some amount of body weight exercises to say, I'm comfortable now with my action familiarity. I know what it's like to do a bicep curl. I know what it's like to do a push-up. That way, if you were just transported in the gym, it might get easier and you might have the tools available to you at the gym, but you don't have to solve both of those things at the same time of saying, I don't even know what I'm doing and I don't know any of the details about where I'm doing it. And you can do this in the reverse. You can absolutely familiarize yourself with the space and the environment beforehand. You can say, I'm just going to go to the gym. I'm not going to work out. I might just like walk on the treadmill, or I just checked in. I like saw everybody at the front desk. I opened the door. I said, what's up? And then I left. Like now I at least have this thing that I might have worked up in my head to be this unknown that I have no idea about. Now I've at least made it concrete. I've made it real and I'm familiar with it. So then you can extend into the gym and you can merge your action familiarity and your location unfamiliarity. Again, I think it's worth looking at the gym as just like more tools. So trying to build your ability as like a carpenter or as a skilled person in painting or in whatever, viewing it from the sense of saying, I have this identity about myself. I know about the actions. The actual location is not that important other than the fact that it affords me some tools like a Smith machine or a squat rack. And eventually you'll begin to understand how to use those like industrial tools, but it's not really worthwhile to jump right in and say, I'm going to figure out all the tools first. Interacting with them is good. Interact with your tools. I absolutely think that's important, but it is far better, in my opinion, to build consistency on the small actions ahead of time. As I mentioned, I think identifying as someone who exercises is really important. I'll skip through this. I also want to note that lifting is probably going to be boring until it isn't, and there are ways to find out how it's boring for you. I think focusing on mind-muscle connection is a way to make it less boring, where you're viewing it as an act of meditation and you're saying, I'm here, I'm present, and find exercises that are fun. You have to tweak your program and say, I don't really enjoy doing squats in a 5x5 set, where I do actually really like doing leg press, where I'm just smashing them out and I'm getting 20 reps of leg press. But you're never going to know which one you like until you try a couple different things out. It's much like eating cuisine, where you say, I don't even know, this is all very foreign to me. I'm going to sample everything until I find what I like more. Tracking, I think, is definitely a symptom of our desire to plan and to have kind of schematic thinking. I think it's absolutely worthwhile if it helps you to track your macros, track your workouts, and give yourself this sense of accomplishment. However, I think that tracking falls into this problem of binary thinking where people say it's all or nothing. I didn't track my macros. I didn't track my workouts. You can totally break this down and say, if I'm going to track just whether or not I went to the gym today, that's tracking. You can break down tracking and say whether or not I had a protein shake today. You can use tracking and say, did I consume soda or excessive sugar today? You could track on a weekly basis and say, did I even hit the gym one time this week or not? Rather than saying I'm going to track each of my workouts and say the exact number of reps and the exact number of sets and the exact weight. And I just think of this as the concept of friction. Like, what am I more accustomed to? What is part of my routine? If it is that I bring a notepad to the gym and I write down all of my little details, if I'm familiar with that, sure, great. But if that's a huge departure from my routine and I'd rather just like check a box on my phone that I went to the gym once this week, then I think that's a way better lens to look at tracking. So trying to identify where there might be friction for you in tracking is really important. Next, I want to talk about just like a quick sample program. So again, I generally recommend 3 sets of each exercise in something like what I'm about to show you. I try to rest for 2 to 3 minutes between each set. Generally, if it's a compound exercise, I try to rest a little bit longer than an isolated exercise. I don't think that this is scientifically based, but I personally find that it has to do with my level of global fatigue. If I'm doing a full body squat, then I'm hitting more volume of my muscles. Whereas if I'm just doing a bicep curl, I feel like I'm generally better recovered if I do like a 2-minute rest versus like a 3-minute rest compared to a squat. Always worth it to go with what your body says and try to get near failure or failure within this 8 to 12 range if you're trying to get muscle mass gains. And I try to basically just cycle through this so that I hit the gym 3 to 5 times a week, 4 to 5 times a week. Again, not terribly important. I think it's better to just start getting in the habit of going once and then trying to ideate on how do I get to this like vision of what it is that I want to be in the future. If you want to go all 7 days a week, great. So looking at this program, generally I would go in and on day 1, I'm going to do 3x10 of bench, 3x10 of chest supported rows, 3x10 of split squats, and so on, sort of progressing from left to right for each day. It is really important, again, that you go with your level of motivation and understanding your own capacity for the day. So if I had a really killer workout today and I have time to go tomorrow, but I'm feeling kind of low energy, I might go into the gym and just do incline bench and pull-ups and then leave. It's up to you to decide, in my opinion, whether or not you're just going to, on the next day, go and just skip and say, I'm going to try to get maybe 4 exercises, maybe 5 exercises. Or if you want to kind of pick up where you left off and said, I'm going to do next day leg press, cable crunches, lunge walks. And this comes down to understanding your own level of muscle balance and your own tolerance for these kinds of things. So I think the more that you've said, I took a month and I went through and did this 3 days a week, and then I did now 4 days a week, and then I did for the next week 1 day a week, and then the next week 2 days a week, and then you're on month 2 and you've said, you know, I kind of felt like I actually skipped leg press a bunch. I might need to actually not skip this time. Absolutely pay attention to your body, pay attention to when you are finding resistance for a specific exercise. And if you are like, I just never do calves, maybe you actually want to move calves to the beginning of your workout. Maybe you want to do calves more often. This tries to get a pretty comprehensive overview of the muscles in your body. There are definitely more exercises that you would want to add in order to make sure that you're hitting your rotator cuff, some of the muscles of your rotator cuff, some of the muscles of your hips, like hip abduction and adduction, are really important that might actually benefit from being hit more. I generally have as a rule of thumb that I try to begin my day with a really high energy compound exercise. So something like bench, something like dips. Generally, this program is chest forward. So starting out with a compound exercise that is generally globally fatiguing. So something like split squats are pretty fatiguing. Something like hack squats add a lot of fatigue to your body. I try to do those before I do something like wrist extensions, which are just fundamentally not that much volume, not that taxing on your overall body. So I kind of try to progress left to right from doing my most taxing thing first, unless again that I feel like I've neglected something. So if I'm like, I have been skipping hamstrings all the time, I'm gonna probably lead with hamstring curl. Or if I'm like, I'm skipping my rotator cuff work far too often, then I'll probably try to just get it first. And that's just my philosophy on how to make it most effective, most likely that I do that exercise. And there's a quick program example in here, kind of talking about that same concept. So again, I think it's worth to think about progressive overload as you do all of your exercises. So as you're working out at home or at the gym, try to get some level of progressive overload, whether that is in the level of weight that you're doing or the level of reps. And I haven't really listed like cardio or supplemental exercise. I think it's absolutely worthwhile that you add in some other form of motion. So doing something like stretching, doing walking, stair climbers, great for cardio. I find that I get a lot of my cardio through just other activities like hiking, rock climbing, jujitsu, which are not cardio specific, but they're more cardio than doing bench press and then resting for 3 minutes at a time. So again, find something that's easy to start, low friction to start, pick up on that, pay attention to your body. And if you have any other questions on any of the material here, let me know. And that's it for this one. Thanks so much.